Thank you all so much for coming out today. My name is Sarah Colley. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at the Great Falls Public Library, and we are here to connect people and knowledge through a variety of different programs, events, and opportunities. Author talks like this are a pretty regular occurrence at a library. Wild, who'd have thunk? But we always love to be able to have so many different people come in and talk about a variety of different things. We recently had Julian Brave Noise Cat in from Canada, and he talked about his book, We Survived the Night. And then we also had local author Megan Sanford a couple weeks ago, and she talked about the Anaconda Copper Mines and its relation to Great Falls. So that was a lot of fun to be able to have a memoir, and then a historical nonfiction book, and now a historical novel. So isn't this so fun? So I'm excited to have you all here just for safety purposes. The restrooms are out in the hallway. There's also a water fountain in the hallway. Please feel free to use those at any point in time. In case of an emergency, please use these stairs, which are out the door, to the right, and then to the right again, and that will bring you right up to the first floor. Okay? All right, sweet. So, Montana-born author Christina Baldwin transformed her family lineage in the Sun River Valley into a historical novel of rural Montana in the early 1940s. Her resulting book, the one we're here to talk about, is The Beekeeper's Question, Love and Honey, War and Reckoning, a novel of World War II. Is a book club favorite, and we have a book club right here. Isn't that amazing? This book also was just awarded the Indie Book Award, so that was with the Independent Book.
Independent Publishers Association.
Yeah, so that's really exciting that we have a brand new award, and if you look at it, it kind of looks like the Olympic Awards. Yeah. So that's what we were saying earlier. So that's super fun. I'm not going to read the synopsis of the book because we're all here to talk about it and hear a little bit about the book as well. So please join me in welcoming Christina to the library.
Thank you. Thank you to the public library. Oh my goodness. I always have said, I've been a writer for many, many years, and I've always said every writer has to do at least one lifetime as a librarian. Because even today with Wikipedia and all that, libraries are still so essential. So as Sarah said, I was born in Great Falls and then taken out to Fort Shaw and put on the ground there. You'll see pictures of that in a minute. I was last here, and so I summered a lot here with my family. But I've never actually lived here as an adult. And I was last here in 2019 when we put my father's ashes in the ground at Sun River Cemetery. And I made a promise that summer that I would finally finish this story that just had been haunting me and would not let me go. So how many people here think that you have a book inside you? Wow! Come on, people! Because I think we all have a book inside us. Why is this freezing? There we go. That we have a book inside us because we are born as a single sentence, and when we die, we are a full book. So the storyline of this book just kept drawing me back here to Montana, to the family heritage. It seemed to be the only place I could write this story, and I tried for a long time to try to get it out of World War II. But it just kept slapping me back into the 40s, and we'll talk more about why I think that happened. But this is a beautiful picture of Sun River, isn't it? I almost have never seen it that green because we usually came out in August. So when I saw this, I went, wow! But I always asked my grandfather why he didn't keep going until there were trees. Because we lived in Minnesota, and there were trees in Minnesota. And he said he liked the big sky because it brought him closer to his sense of God. And I thought, well, that's good enough. So we became the people of the grasslands. And out here, dryland farming, those of you who are so local, you know all this already. But this is the traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy. And I wanted to bring this story home because it feels to me like it grows right out of Montana soil, especially the Sun River Valley. And I want also to acknowledge the Amscapee people as the first holders and roamers on this valley. And this was Nappy's World. I think this picture is actually out at Fort Shaw on one of the highways signs, or maybe at the Buffalo Jump. Look at that territory. From Yellowstone up in northern Alberta was where the Piikani people were. They stayed on this side of the Rockies, which they referred to as the backbone of the world. And Chief Mountain, which is currently in the national park, is a very sacred spot for them. And then Montana itself is so rich with tribal history and territory. And it provides us with both a proud heritage and a very devastating history. When I grew up, I had no comprehension about any of this. I wore a red felt cowgirl outfit with little plastic trim and ran around, learned to ride a pony, and helped my uncle out at the ranch in Benchland. And I always felt like I had missed the real West, you know? And but years later, when I saw this map of how the state was divided into homestead plots, I knew that if I ever wrote about my heritage, that I needed to really grapple with real history in the writing of my story. And that my people and your people were good people. And they lived within the social mores of their times, just like we live within the mores of our times. And the subtitle of this book is Love and Honey, War and Reckoning. So I decided to do a little reckoning through the story. And here's a bit of the backstory. Like many Montanans descended from the settlement era, I was raised on stories of hardship and resilience in that pioneering generation. I'm sure everybody in this room has a couple, or many. And I love my family and the stories that kept floating around the dining room table, and their history and presence in the Sun River Valley. In 1919, my grandfather, Leo Baldwin Sr., formed Baldwin and Sons Beeline Honey. And 4 generations of our family ran that honey business, and then sold it to the Barrows family, and then sold it to Jim Savoy. So it's still there, and you can go buy some. You can taste the book. That's what I say. I usually buy about a 10-pound bucket from him, and then put it in little jars and tell people you can literally lick this book. These are the Baldwin boys in 1926. My grandfather Leo and his 4 big boys. Ooh, stop, please. Don't do that to me. Why are you advancing? Okay. The big boys, and then my father is the little one right there in front. And then these are my parents in 1945. And this is my dress, a 1945 simplicity pattern that a friend found in a thrift store and made for me. And then finally I arrive on the land, and I am born to the bees. So I want to read a little bit, just a few paragraphs, called Buzz, Honey, and Magic. This first photograph of me, I am 3 months old, lying on a baby blanket in my baptismal dress on the lawn of my grandparents' house. July, Montana, the buzz of bees pollinating raspberries and garden vegetables. My whole body is stretched over summer-warmed grass. Sun on my face, I lift my head and kick chubby legs. I do not remember this in any comb of mental memory, but my body knows. Whatever ceremony has just occurred at Sunday service in the Little Methodist Church my grandfather stewards, the one occurring in this photo is the land itself binding me to this place. That autumn, my parents will drive east to New Jersey, where my father will study at Drew University. We live in a garage apartment on an estate where my mother is a maid, and I learn to walk alongside the owner's daughter, same age, share a sandbox, different class. Loopy, honey-colored curls, a baby brother moving to Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Minnesota. I will never reside in Montana, but it will always feel like home. When I'm 5, we take the train from Indianapolis to Great Falls so my father can work the honey harvest and my mother can join the daughters-in-law putting up garden produce for the winter. Here my Montana memories begin, picking raspberries, running through irrigation water, sucking honeycomb, and bees, bees, bees. Finally allowed a ride out to the bee yards in the honey truck with my grandpa and an uncle. I watched them smoke hives amid the buzzing swirl. On the way back to the homestead, I accidentally put my hand on a bee caught in the truck cab. I remember the sharp pang and the sting, my howl of surprise. My grandfather plucks the stinger out and sucks my hand to draw out venom. His hands a calloused tenderness, his lips a blessing. He tells me, "Be brave, Chrissy, you're a real Baldwin now." I am carried into the kitchen, turned over to the women, baking soda applied to my hand. There's supper around the family table. There's ice cream on the porch steps. Stories float like pollen in the evening air. If this sounds like the backstory to the beekeeper's question, it is. So this is a quote from Mary Lopez that has really informed me throughout this writing process. If stories come to you, care for them and learn to give them away where they are needed. And that is my greatest hope for this book, is that it is a story that as I give it away, it will be needed by the people who read it. And it raises the question of how we both honor and release family lineage. People ask me why I didn't do this as a memoir. Because I wanted to write a larger piece. I wanted to give ordinary people, especially white people, rural people, a story to stand on. I wanted to expand beyond family history and anecdotes to look at where and who we come from, where and who we are, and to use story to imagine where and who we might become. And story needs a time frame to do that. 60 years later, in his 90s, my father lived down the road from where I live on Whidbey Island, north of Seattle, Washington. And it was finally time to care for the stories that he had deposited into my memory over so many years. And it raised in me the question, why can't we stop writing and reading about World War II? I suspect this is not the first book you've ever read about the 1940s. And over time, I thought it's because we're still learning those lessons. We're still being called to look at how ordinary people rise to moments of courage. And because it seems the war's not over, that the demands of the time then and the demands of the time now form a kind of arc. In the book, our two characters, Leo Cooper, I'll introduce them to you in a minute, but I'm just going to read this quote from them. Leo is a beekeeping Methodist minister in the story, and his friend Doc is a fictionalized version of a woman some of you may know as well, Doc Russell. And these two are sitting on the porch in the summer of 1942 when all the young men are disappearing and they're waiting for the night breeze and talking about the times they're living through. Leo whispered into the dusk, "This war is a three-headed dragon, each black mouth round with teeth, consuming young men." That's the strain of it. Doc peered skyward. We don't know what will become of them, or us, or our country. Caged between the big and little dippers, Draco the dragon writhed in the night sky. Leo cleared his throat. "Philosophy, music, architecture, literature. I will not accept fascism as the final outcome of Western civilization." The porch boards creaked under their chairs. But it's terrifying, Doc said. All those swastika and people who a few years ago were like us, now burning books, throwing rocks, hating Jews. Doc rested her hand on Leo's arm. How did this happen? Leo stopped rocking. Moral codes, like the Golden Rule, the 10 Commandments, the Beatitudes, they are whispers in the human heart. Hitler has hypnotized the German people with promises of greatness in exchange for their souls. Now it takes the horrors of war to break that spell, specifically for the Germans to lose and for us to win without losing our souls. Doc stared at the cosmic expanse of the Milky Way. You're the local preacher. I'm an old country doc. What can we do? Help. Help people live through what is required of us. From the pulpit and the bedside, as best we can, we will offer comfort and cure. May I be that steadfast, Doc whispered. Me too, Leo sighed. And the honey needs harvesting. I pray help will come. In the last dozen years of his life, my father grew more and more fascinated with his Montana upbringing. We made half a dozen road trips out here. He had an older sister still alive in Lewistown, who died at 103. And we would cut off the interstate in Missoula and come over Bonner Pass and down into the valley, and he would just start talking and streaming memory and history and his view of social issues in the valley, and I would just turn the phone recorder on and put it in the seat between us and listen as he talked himself home. He talked of coming of age in the Depression years and how subsistence farming in the valley helped sustain them. He talked about the revolution in the American home front in the 1940s and declared it was as dramatic for us as the actual war. The transformation of American farming in those years from the horse to the deer. And writing about the home front allowed me to include women and their stories. I decided I didn't want to make a book that had an individual hero, that I wanted the family to be the hero. I wanted to embed the challenges of life and the faraway war into community because that's where most of us live. So I fictionalized Fort Shaw and the Sun River and turned it into Pigeon River, but I left it embedded in the landscape and surrounding small towns. So the characters drive Highway 200. They turn north on 89 and go past Freeze Out Lake, turn into Velure, take back roads into the backcountry. I needed to move things around, which is one of the gifts of fiction, so I turned the church on the corner of Fort Shaw into a Methodist church and put a cemetery behind it. We'll find out later this evening from you lovely ladies how I did. And I look forward to that. And I needed to simplify this huge, complex Baldwin family that I came from. You have 8 kids and spouses and all of their children, and so I created the Cooper family, which had only 3 sons. So Franklin, the youngest, is a soldier in the war who sends his Irish war bride, Moira, home to Pigeon River. And then there's Jesse, a runaway middle son who returns to help his father with the honey crop and brings his Blackfeet wife, Willow Shines the Light, whose presence ignites both prejudice and support. And Boyd, the oldest, a newly graduated doctor in Seattle, married to a Nisei nurse, living out the war years, tending incarcerated Japanese in Minidoka camp in Iowa. 1940s, the youngers are watched over by the boy's father Leo and by the stalwart friend of the family who's an auntie to everyone in town, Doc Jesperson. is a Doc story. Doc Jesperson had arrived in the valley on a hot August day in 1910 after learning such a place existed from a letter posted on the bulletin board at Starling Medical School, her alma mater. She was a spinster, nearing midlife, educated beyond a woman's expected role. Her father had been a doctor, and she, his only child, had been given some of the privileges that would usually go to a son. The sole female in her medical school class, the good old boys of Columbus, Ohio, including former colleagues of her father's, thwarted her hopes of assuming his practice. The medical board assigned her duty at the penitentiary, where she treated gangrenous toes, stab wounds, broken bones, and internal injuries, oversaw cases of syphilis, tuberculosis, whooping cough, and other communicable diseases. True to her Hippocratic oath, she refused to abandon men already largely abandoned, and developed a capacity to do medicine in almost any circumstances. And then story needs a theme, and it needs events. I had such a journey of discovery writing this, because as I broke away from my own lineage stories, I had to create a whole different world. And I had to get to know people that didn't exist except between my eyes. And there's something that happens when you do this. I've written about 10 nonfiction books, and that's a very different journey than writing fiction. Because when you write fiction and you bring these people alive, they stay alive. You know, at the end of The Color Purple, Alice Walker wrote, "Thank you all for coming." And that's how it really feels. And after a while, I'm writing the story, but it's also kind of writing me. And when I wouldn't know what to do, I would just wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, and I would ask a question of a character. Like Jesse, the middle son, he was kind of a bad dude in one of the early drafts, you know, the prodigal son who ran away. I woke up one night, 3 in the morning, and he said, "I'm not the bad guy." I just loud and clear, and I went, "Okay, who are you then?" And he said, "I'm adopted, and they lied to me." And it just broke the story open in a whole other way. Right? And so it really taught me to listen and ask the story, what's happening next? And so then here's Franklin, and I need to get him to the East Coast. But the war in Europe doesn't really start, you know, for several years later. So I have to imagine what's going on there. So then I discover this is a picture of American troops arriving in Belfast in January of 1942. Yes. And by the time that the war in North Africa started in November of 42, there were 30,000 American troops in Northern Ireland. I had no idea. And then I had to go, well, why was Churchill pressing and pressing the American involvement to start in Africa? I go, what has that got to do? Then I had to go into studying British history and Rommel's army and protecting the Suez Canal, and it was amazing. And it was 2017, so I was working on some variation of this story when my dad and I were visiting with his high school girlfriend, Grace Harding, and she makes this offhand comment about, remember when the POWs were in Fort Shaw? And my chin hit the floor. I had never heard this story. All the stories growing up, no one had ever mentioned that Fort Shaw was used to house POWs. So then I had to figure out, where did they come from? They came from North Africa. They were Rommel's army. Because when the British and the American troops finally drove the Germans practically to the edge of the sea in Tunisia, they had 250,000 German soldiers that they didn't want to just take their guns and let them come back and fight again. So they shipped them all to the U.S. and scattered them across this country to do non-military work. I just got so fascinated by some of these unknown facts. And what I really want to read to you is a little bit from chapter 8, because that is where the story of the beekeeper's question comes in. So at the beginning of this chapter, it's called The Lesson of the Bees. And Leo is taking Mora out into the bee fields for the first time. And he's a little reluctant to do this, and he says to her, I don't know if the bees will accept a woman in the field. And she says, I'm reading ABC XYZ of bee culture, and it's fascinating. It's 900 pages in small print. Leo gave the girl a look. And I don't know if the bees will accept a woman. From what I read, except for a few lazy drones, all bees are female. I think the little ladies and I'll get along just fine. 20 minutes later, the dog jumped onto the flatbed and Mora slid into the passenger seat, and Leo headed north up the highway. He cut across field tracks and a farm bridge, the river still brown with spring runoff, and snaked up a rutted road toward the bench. When the truck surfaced over the ridge, they were suddenly alone with the western vista. Wheatgrass, tall enough to be caught in the wind, shivered like green skin over the rolling land. Mountains erupted along the horizon, slanted heaves of rock face sugared with snowfields. On the train, Mora whispered, the view kind of hypnotized me. Grass madness, Leo nodded. Charlotte always felt she might disappear into the expanse. I planted the yard with cottonwoods and fir trees to hold her in. Leo cleared his throat and pointed to a far-off cluster of grazing animals, distinctive white rumps shining in the morning sun. Pronghorn. Oh my, is this where the deer and the antelope play? Yep, home on the range. He gestured into the view. I could drive these honey roads in my sleep. Mora laughed. That's what Franklin said. Leo swallowed hard. When he talked about this, did he sound like he loved it? Folks be attached to where they come from, even if it was hard, she sighed. What are we looking for? See that darker green? Leo pointed north. That's alfalfa and the irrigation ditch. There's a cluster of stacked white boxes. Mora squinted. Bee yard. On my chart, it's CR 17, Creek Road, and the number of hives. The truck lurched over crusted up tracks. I laid these ruts myself last fall. Rain turning to snow, ground freezing, Franklin gone. I was late. After harvest, beekeepers make sure to leave the hive enough to get through to next blossoms. Mora nodded. Today we'll see how they're doing. Should be a lot of bees, as there's a lot of work. We will stack empty supers, set them up with room for honey. Alfalfa bloom will run a month, then farmers cut for hay, the plants regenerate, and another cut mid-August. Meanwhile, there's clover, hairy vetch, wildflowers, best honey anywhere. Leo parked. The dog jumped down, barking, spinning, lifting his leg. Marking territory, Leo said. Make sure any varmints know he's keeping an eye on things. Mora was pulling on gloves and a bee bonnet he had handed her. She tucked her pants cuffs into the boot tops. Can I move? Will they sting me? They don't want to sting you. You're not a flower, so basically uninteresting. Leo opened his toolbox and pulled out the metal canister of a smoker. Then there's a lot of lovely bee stuff in here. I want to go to where he reveals his question. CR 17 took them an hour checking queens and workers, placing extruders, stacking supers. They moved up the road yard by yard, the dog a muddy mess, riding in his body wedged in the crease of the truck fender. Mason jars pulled out, cold chicken, saltine, scalding water. Maura pulled off the bee bonnet and shook her hair free. Bee life is so organized. Perfection. Leo sucked a chicken bone. Everything in the hive runs on an instinctual purity of pattern. No shirking? No bosses or laws? She asked. Leo shook his head. No stockpiling money so the drones may gorge while the workers starve? He shook his head again. There is death in the hive, he admitted. Only one queen rules. Workers exhaust themselves in summer frenzy. Drones mate and die. Like the sex drive, self-defense is essential to preserving communal life. If the wasp comes to steal honey, guard bees defend the hive. But there is no wanton violence, no rape of innocence, no horrors of war. Bees do not hate. You're describing a world without evil. Tears sprang into Maura's eyes and a buzzing question filled her mind. If the hive is a more benevolent society, why don't humans live as bees live? Leo's face flushed. That is my beekeeper's question. I have spent years peering into their society like a curious god, translating what works for beekind into something that works for mankind. She felt smoked and dreamy. Then why are we the keepers of bees? Shouldn't the bees be the keepers of us? Maura grasped Leo's hand, amazed at her presumption. The buzz intensified until her whole body felt consumed by the A barrier dropped between them. She saw in him the young husband and father building the house, the church, the honey business. She saw Jesus in his hive-white robe, hands dripping with honeycomb, imploring humanity to discern the sacred pattern. In turn, she let Leo see Irish hedgerows and herself, a girl escaped from chores. She let him see her years of service, reading by lamplight, waiting. She showed him Franklin moving across the dance hall, as focused as a drone drawn to the Virgin Queen. Then she blinked, and he blinked, and they were again two giants standing among the floating golden bodies of the bees. She dropped his hand, suddenly shy. Forgive me, sir. It's just the bees wake something in me. So that's the Cooper family. And also I wanted to bring in the history of Fort Shaw. It's just called the Fort. But there were a lot of stories out there about the fort. How it was used by the cavalry, then turned over to the Department of the Interior, and then used as an industrial boarding school from 1892 to 1910. And I want to say that I really honor the Settler Valley and the work that families have done to create a sense of honor about that place and to work with cleaning up the cemetery and all of those things that I saw when I was last out there. And the monument in the middle here to the Indian girls team, and they're playing at the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904, I think. But also a complicated moment. But we get through it. And then we read what scholars have to say about history. But story is what it's like to live on the ground. And that's why I had so much fun working on this book. And I'm happy that you're here and just open up time now for conversation and questions that you might have about this story and the Sun River Valley.
It was hard not to go, ooh.
Yeah,
I know this person, or, you know, or,
yeah.
like, oh, is that these folks, you know, who had such a hand in the history of the valley?
Yeah.
So it was fun. It's been fun reading in that perspective.
I love that you named the J.C. Adams Stone Farm.
Yes.
I love that one.
Yeah. I also want to really honor that I could not have written this book without finding a person in the Blackfeet tribe to serve as a cultural advisor. And just at this time, just so sensitive and so much aware of my blinders and from a white perspective. And she was absolutely generous to me for a number of years. And some of the real things that especially comes out of Jesse's voice when he's talking to his father about the realities of living in the backcountry on the reservation are things that she shared with me that I never would have known otherwise. It took me 3 years to find someone, because I didn't have any direct connection, and I ended up going through a friend of a friend who's a professor in Missoula. He said, well, I had a master's degree student a decade or so ago, and she's the kind of person might be willing to talk to you. So he made introduction. And one August day, I get a text from a 406 number, and I open it up, and she introduced herself, and she said, I'm out picking service berries with the grannies. And, but Garen says I should be open to you, like, who are you, and what are you doing? And so we just started texting, and 90% of our relationship and friendship has been texting, because pretty soon, of course, we get COVID, and so it's really impossible. But she asked me a little about my history in the valley and why I wanted to do the story there, and I told her that my grandfather had taught at the Indian school, and I said it really changed him, but it took a long time. But he did teach there, and she said, what year? So I looked it up, and I said about 19, just before the school closed in 1910. And she said, my grandmother was there as a student. And then there was this text pause, where the little dots keep going and going and going, and you wonder what's coming next. And she said, I think our ancestors are calling us to the table. So, and several years later, when I had the privilege of meeting her, I said, why did you say yes to me? And she said, because you told me the truth, and you were never defensive. And so it allowed me to tell you the truth and not be defensive. So I always want to acknowledge that. Other questions or comments? Yes.
So I liked that you tied in the World War II North African campaign, because my dad was right there in the footsteps of Franklin. And so that kind of authenticated the whole thing, because you did a really good job with that.
Thank you.
So I thought, well, that's the whole story I knew.
Yeah. Wow.
And I did eventually get to Anzio and went to the graveyard there. My dad did not die there, or I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
But it was just so neat to have that part of World War II brought to light, because most everything you hear is about Normandy Beach, and
I know. Yeah.
and that North African campaign was just as big.
Yeah.
You just didn't get the end glory, I guess, that Normandy Beach did, and so I really enjoyed that part of it that you did that in. Yeah.
Yeah, it took me a long time to really work that part of it in, both the historical accuracy, but also the realities, because there's I can't remember the author's name now, but there's a man who wrote a trilogy, a Washington Post journalist, and the first book, which is like 500 or 700 pages, is called The Army at Dawn. And it really goes into how unprepared the U.S. was to jump into that war. And Franklin is actually deployed with the Iowa National Guard to Northern Ireland because they just took anybody who knew how to shoot a gun and had one, you know, because they were literally training the army in Louisiana with broomsticks. They just had not geared up for this war. And so it took a long time before they felt they could even start. And so Patton left Virginia. Maybe your dad was in that wave of Patton's army coming over, and the Armada from Virginia. And then there was the Armada of the Northern Ireland. They had kind of parked all these soldiers up there to be ready and closer to Europe. Because the U-boats were still taking out 40% of everything we were shipping to England. I mean, it just, what must be at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean at that time? Just both human cost and equipment, you know.
He left the valley here and then he went to Fort Lewis, Washington.
Wow,
To
yeah,
train.
yeah.
And then, as far as I know, from there straight to, I don't know if they did any more training or not, but Casablanca. So he did 3 water landings,
Wow,
which after
yeah.
seeing Saving Private Ryan, I don't know how
Yes.
he could get past one. How'd he do it? And then he drove a Jeep a lot, and he was a sharpshooter because he shot coyotes here.
Yeah, yeah.
So he had great eyes, and he rode in a Jeep and did reconnaissance. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it was, I liked, you know, everything that you brought into it, so I learned some more about what was
Well,
going on.
I showed those battle scenes to my brother, who's a Vietnam vet, who's a radio man in Vietnam. And I was way down in the story before he went, wait a minute, you've got the wrong radio. You know, you're in your mind, you're thinking about my radio. That's not the World War II radio. And then he started sending me all this stuff from the World War II Museum. And he said, you know, they're running telephone wires. I mean, it was just crazy compared to technology now, hard to imagine. They would clip into a phone line if one was around. And, my sister-in-law's uncle was a wire runner, and they would put these spools on their back and just run wire across the desert. And so they could, because that was more secure line to run a phone line and to run radio, because the Germans and the Americans were able to intercept so much at that time. It was really practice. It was like junior high at war with real bullets. It was, and then they got better and better as they crossed that continent. But yeah, I'm glad your dad lived through that. Pretty brutal.
And really came out pretty mentally unscathed,
That's good.
but,
Yeah.
yeah. And they did, Dad always talked about the hill.
The guilt, yeah.
No, the hill
Ah,
that you mentioned in there.
yeah.
I don't know the name of it.
Kasserine Pass, or
It was the one,
it's the
in
other-
Sicily or North Africa, I think it was
Yeah.
still in North Africa, that they had to get up a hill. And
I
he
know.
talked about that.
And that scene where, in the book, Franklin and his young, untrained officer, you know, and they're playing the Star Spangled Banner and Stars and Stripes Forever out of the soundtrack, thinking, okay, everybody come out of your holes and come down here, and then, and just, yeah. Anywhere you do it, any way you look at it, war is a horrible thing for young people. Yeah. Other comments, yes?
Totally different. Can you talk more about the mystical
The mystical
part of the book? Mora's history
Yeah.
with Irish kind of folklore. I don't mean to, I don't know how to say it, but you know,
It's
old,
the fae.
old knowledge,
Yeah,
right?
old knowledge.
And how you learned about the black faith And how it seemed like they started paralleling.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's like 3 spiritual traditions in the book, kind of what I would really think of as a strong sort of Protestant ethic that many of our civil laws come off of that kind of ethic that's embedded in mainstream Christianity. And then with Morta having this Irish background, I thought, ooh, it's just too delicious not to go into some Celtic mysticism there. And so I brought in her Nana and her connection to the bees. And I've spent enough time in Ireland, it's very close to the surface. I mean, the mixture of that kind of Celtic mysticism and Catholicism, and then in the north, Protestantism, it's just all mixed together. And so I just listen to Irish people when I'm there, and they look at you like, what do you mean? You don't know that this is a magic well, or this is, you know. And another commonality between North Ireland and the fort even, is when I was in Ireland in not Cullybackey, I love the names of these towns, in Letterfrack. Out in Ireland, there's an old monastery that was run there for many years, and it's at the edge of the national park there. And I just came up through the town of Letterfrack and was looking at this mission that's no longer there. And I turn around, and there's a cemetery full of Irish children. Just like out here, there are cemeteries full of Indian children. I mean, I just stood there and wept and thought, this is the same thing happening in another culture. Because they were the lost boys. They would take orphans off the street in Dublin and so forth and bring them out to the countryside and use them basically as slave labor. And when they died, they just popped them in the back of the mission in the ground. So it gets fascinating to me to see all of the interweaving on the social level, and at the spiritual level. And I love it when Willow, the young Blackfeet woman, says to Maura, you know, behind, white people have to go behind, and behind, and behind, and then you find their indigenous roots. And it's been very meaningful to me in the years that I was traveling and teaching in Europe, to feel what that feels like. I mean, to step onto the ground in England and go, whoa, you know, it's like something comes up through your feet. And I had that, it gave me an understanding then of what Native people experience that is much older than our 100 or 150 year history here. It's how the land comes up through your feet. So I really wanted to give Maura that, and for her to be able to translate it. And there is, coming out of England especially, and out of the Celtic tradition, I've read several books called The Shamanic Way of the Bee. And bees have been sacred and shamanic creatures from Greece on up through Europe. And so it's, as well as producing honey and wax and other useful things, there's this whole thread that has been moving. You know, the British are just full of that stuff. And, the Theosophical Society and the tarot cards and all the things that came out of the esoteric parts of Englishness and Irishness. Thank you.